In the quiet hours before dawn, in the space between sleep and waking, in the threshold where the veil between worlds grows thin, there exists a prophecy that has been misunderstood for thousands of years. A prophecy that has been interpreted as a warning of apocalypse, as a prediction of destruction, as a foretelling of the end of all things. But what if this prophecy was never about destruction at all? What if it was instead a prophecy of transformation, a description of the death of the old consciousness and the birth of the new, a map of the journey that humanity must undertake in order to awaken to its true nature and its true purpose? This is the story of how a prophecy was deliberately misinterpreted, how its true meaning was hidden, and how, in our own time, the real prophecy is finally being revealed. The story begins in a time so ancient that it exists more in the realm of symbol and myth than in the realm of historical fact. In this time, there were beings of such wisdom, such spiritual development, such profound understanding of the nature of consciousness that they were revered as prophets and seers. These beings possessed the ability to perceive the patterns of human consciousness, to understand the cycles of evolution, to see the trajectory of humanity's development across vast spans of time. And they perceived something that filled them with both hope and a deep sense of responsibility. They perceived that humanity would undergo a great transformation, a passage through darkness into light, a death of the old self and a birth of the new. They perceived that this transformation would not be easy, that it would involve the collapse of illusions, the dissolution of structures that had seemed permanent, the shattering of beliefs that had seemed unquestionable. But they also perceived that this transformation was necessary, that it was part of the cosmic plan, that it would ultimately lead to the awakening of human consciousness to heights that were almost unimaginable. And so these ancient seers created a prophecy, a teaching that would preserve this knowledge, that would guide humanity through the transformation when the time came. But they understood that this prophecy could be dangerous if it was misunderstood, if it was interpreted literally rather than symbolically, if it was used to create fear rather than to inspire awakening. And so they encoded it carefully, hiding the true meaning beneath layers of symbol and metaphor, ensuring that only those with the wisdom to understand would be able to perceive the real message. But as the centuries passed, as the knowledge was transmitted from generation to generation, the true meaning of the prophecy was gradually lost. Those who came after the original seers began to interpret the prophecy literally, began to see it as a prediction of physical destruction, began to use it to create fear and to maintain control over the people. Religious institutions seized upon the prophecy and used it as a tool of domination, preaching that the world would end, that judgment would come, that only the righteous would be saved. And in doing so, they completely obscured the true meaning of the prophecy, which was about transformation, about awakening, about the birth of a new consciousness. The story of the recovery of the true prophecy in the modern world begins with a scholar named Cassandra, a woman who had dedicated her entire life to the study of ancient prophecies, to the decoding of hidden messages, to the understanding of the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface of religious teachings. Cassandra was named after the ancient Greek prophetess who could see the future but was cursed so that no one would believe her. And she understood that her role was to speak truths that many would find difficult to accept. Cassandra had always been troubled by the conventional interpretation of the ancient prophecies. She had always sensed that there was something missing, something that did not quite fit, something that suggested a deeper meaning that had been hidden or lost. She had spent decades researching, studying ancient texts in their original languages, comparing different versions of prophecies across different cultures, looking for patterns and connections that might reveal the true message. It was during a meditation in a sacred cave that Cassandra received a vision that would change the course of her life. In this vision, She found herself in the presence of the ancient seers themselves, beings of immense wisdom and compassion who had created the original prophecy. And they spoke to her, revealing to her the true meaning of the prophecy, showing her how it had been misinterpreted, inviting her to become a carrier of the authentic message. The prophecy was never about destruction, they said to her, their voices resonating with the authority of ages. It was always about transformation. It was about the death of the old consciousness and the birth of the new. It was about the collapse of illusions and the emergence of truth. It was about the journey from separation to unity, from darkness to light, from fear to love. But those who came after us, those who sought to maintain power through the control of consciousness, deliberately twisted the meaning of the prophecy. They used it to create fear, to maintain domination, to prevent the awakening that the prophecy was meant to guide. Cassandra emerged from this vision transformed. She understood that she had been given access to knowledge that had been hidden for thousands of years, knowledge that could reshape the entire understanding of human history and human destiny. She understood that her role was to help restore the true meaning of the prophecy, to help humanity understand that the transformation that was occurring was not a tragedy to be feared, but an awakening to be welcomed. She began to research with new urgency, looking for evidence of the true prophecy in the ancient texts, in the symbols that had been preserved, in the fragments of teaching that had survived despite centuries of suppression. She discovered that the true prophecy had been preserved in various forms in different cultures, that it appeared in the teachings of Buddhism, in the wisdom of the indigenous peoples, in the mystical traditions of various religions, and she discovered that the common thread running through all of these versions was the same. The prophecy was about transformation, about awakening, about the birth of a new consciousness. She discovered that what had been interpreted as the end of the world was actually the end of a particular way of being, the end of a particular consciousness, the end of a particular era in human development. She discovered that the judgment that had been spoken of was not a judgment by an external God, but the natural consequence of consciousness becoming aware of itself, of seeing clearly what it had created, of being forced to choose between continuing in illusion or awakening to truth. She discovered that the apocalypse that had been feared was actually the revelation, the pulling back of the veil, the unveiling of truth that had been hidden. She discovered that the destruction that had been predicted was the destruction of illusions, the collapse of false structures, the dissolution of beliefs that no longer served consciousness. And she discovered that beyond this destruction, beyond this collapse, there was the possibility of a new world, a new consciousness, a new way of being that was based on truth rather than illusion, on unity rather than separation, on love rather than fear. If you want a practical step-by-step explanation of the path of knowledge we're exploring here today, I've created a complete guide to help you apply it in your own life. You'll find the link in the description. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. Cassandra began to work with other scholars and spiritual teachers who had also recognized the truth about the prophecy, who understood that the conventional interpretation was a distortion of the original meaning, who were committed to the restoration of the authentic message. Together, they began to decode the prophecy, to understand how it described the transformation that was occurring in the present moment, to recognize how the events that were unfolding in the world were the fulfillment of the true prophecy, not the false prophecy of destruction that had been taught for so long. They discovered that the prophecy described several stages of transformation. The first stage was the stage of awakening, the moment when individuals began to recognize that something was wrong with the world as it had been presented to them, when they began to question the narratives they had been taught, when they began to seek truth beyond the official stories. The second stage was the stage of dissolution, the moment when the old structures began to collapse, when the illusions began to be revealed, when the false foundations upon which civilization had been built began to crumble. The third stage was the stage of chaos, the moment when the old order was breaking down, but the new order had not yet been fully established, when there was confusion and uncertainty, when it seemed as though everything was falling apart. The fourth stage was the stage of emergence,